This is examples of music for Objective 6.1 and the next few objectives. Objective 6.1 says identify the root, third, and fifth of a triad when the notes are mixed up on the staff, not neatly stacked in thirds. This means they're not in root position. This means that the root of the chord is not the lowest sounding note. So here we have an example of that. This is a music example of the composer Schubert. If we look here in the bass clef, we see we have three notes, but they're not stacked in thirds neatly like these over here. There is a gap between this note and this note. Let's identify the notes from the bottom to the top. We have a D, an F, and a B flat. In order to determine if these make up a triad, and then to determine what is the root, third, and fifth, we have to see if we can rearrange these in our mind so that they do neatly stack up in thirds with no gaps. In this case, if we arrange this in our mind from bottom to top with a B flat on the bottom, we would have B flat, D, F. Therefore, the root would be B flat, the third would be D, the fifth would be F. And that's what we have here. Even though they're placed out of that order, the B flat is still the root, the D is still the third, and the F is still the fifth. Here's another example where the notes are mixed up. The notes are F sharp, A, D, D. If we thought of these notes on one staff, we would clearly see that there's a gap between the A and the D. In our mind, if we rearrange these notes, we could get neatly stacked thirds if we had the D on the bottom. D, F sharp, A. Therefore, this is a D major chord. D is the root, F sharp is the third, and A is the fifth. In this example, on the first measure, we have A flat, E flat, C. These can be arranged in our mind as a triad without gaps if we said A flat, C, E flat. Therefore, A flat is the root of the chord, C is the third of the chord, E flat is the fifth of the chord. In the very next set of notes, we have the same type of notes and they're rearranged again. Now we have C in the bass, A flat, E flat, A flat. It's a different arrangement of the same notes, but it's still an A flat triad. So A flat is the root, C is the third, E flat is the fifth. Objective 6.2 says identify and notate triads in root position, first inversion, and second inversion. Going back to our first example, we see that this is a B flat chord. We have D in the bass, then F, then B flat. B flat's the root, D is the third, F is the fifth. Since the third of this chord is the lowest sounding pitch, this triad is in first inversion. Here we have an E flat chord, E flat, G, B flat. Since the root of this chord is the lowest sounding pitch, this one is in root position. So these first triads here are in first inversion, these triads are in root position. In our second example, we said that this is a D major chord. We have D as the root, F sharp as the third, A as the fifth. Since the third of the chord is the lowest sounding pitch, this chord is in first inversion. The very next chord is an A major chord, A, C sharp, E. Since the root of the chord is the lowest sounding pitch, this one is in root position. First inversion, root position. In our third example, we have an A flat chord here, and we also have an A flat chord here. This one has A flat as the lowest sounding pitch, A flat, C, E flat. This one has C, or the third of the chord, as the lowest sounding pitch, but still A flat, C, E flat as the notes involved in our chord. This first one is in root position, the second one is in first inversion. In this example from the Beethoven Piano Sonata in F minor, I'd like to look at this chord. Here the notes are C in octaves, and then F and A. That would be an F, A, C chord. F is the root, A is the third, C is the fifth. Since we have the C in the bass, this is what we call second inversion. One thing I want to point out of the performance of this piece is that this little symbol here indicates a turn. So you'll hear the piano player play this note, and then several notes will go above and below that note before it hits this little note, which is a grace note to this note. Objective 6.3 says identify, notate, and label a triad's position using figured bass numbers. We will learn in later objectives exactly what figured bass is and how to do something called realizing the figured bass. But for this objective, the learning resources will teach you what numbers we use to indicate root position, first inversion, and second inversion for triads. In our first example, here we have the first inversion triad, which the figured bass number we'd use to indicate this would be a 6. Here we have a root position triad, of which the figured bass numbers we would use would be 5, 3, or we could just omit them, and if there is nothing, we assume that it's in root position. In our second example, we have that first inversion triad here again, and the inversion number underneath that would be the number 6. It is followed by a root position triad, therefore the figured bass number underneath would either be 5 over 3, or just leave it blank. In our example where we had a second inversion triad, right here, the numbers under that would be 6 over 4. We're going to do objective 6.4 through 6.6 all at the same time. 6.4 says identify the major and minor key of a piece of music involving chords by using the key signatures and other notation clues. 6.5 says identify and label triads with correct Roman numerals in real music examples. 6.6 says identify and label triads with both correct Roman numerals and inversion numbers in real music examples. In previous examples, you were asked to name the major or minor key of a piece, but basically given just a single line melody. Now we're asking you to do so with a little bit more information and using the chords as clues as well. You've also learned in previous objectives what chord qualities to expect in major keys and minor keys. For example, in major, the tonic chord is major, the 2 chord is minor, the 3 chord is minor, the 4 chord is major, the 5 chord is major, the 6 chord is minor, and the 7th chord is diminished. In minor keys, the 1 chord is minor, the 2 chord is diminished, the 3 chord is major, the 4 chord is minor, the 5 chord is usually major, the 6 chord is major, and the 7th chord is usually diminished. So in this piece of music, we have a key signature of 2 flats, which would indicate the major key of B flat major or the minor key of G minor. We start on an F, which is the dominant of B flat major. And our first chord that we have is B flat, D, F, a first inversion B flat chord. We see a piece with several B flat chords, and also this excerpt ends on a B flat chord that does not contain the fifth, B flat, D, B flat. So it's safe to assume that this music example is in the key of B flat. With that being said, this B flat chord in first inversion would be labeled as a capital I with a 6 for a 1 chord in first inversion. Here we have a root position E flat major chord, E flat, G, B flat. There's also a D sounding up here, but I'm going to ignore that as a non-chord tone at the moment. We'll learn more about those types of pitches later. E flat is the subdominant note in B flat major, or what we call the 4th scale degree. So E flat, G, B flat would be labeled as Roman numeral IV for Roman numeral 4 in capital. We would not put figure-based numbers on it because it's in root position. But if we did, we'd put the numbers 5 over 3. In this example, we have 2 sharps in the key signature, which would indicate either the major key of D major or the minor key of B minor. All voices start on A, which happens to be the dominant note of D major. The next chord is a D major chord, D, F sharp, A, shown in first inversion. In this particular excerpt also has a D at the end, D, F sharp with the A omitted. With no other accidentals, the case for this is that it is in D major. The first note is not really a triad. There's no third or fifth. However, it is the root note of the 5 chords, so we might just label it with a capital V down here. The second chord is a full D major chord, put in first inversion with the F sharp or the third in the bass. Therefore, if this is in D major, we put a capital I with the number 6 by it, showing that it is in first inversion. This next one is an A major chord, A, C sharp, E, in root position. A is the dominant of D major, so this chord would be labeled with a Roman numeral with a capital Roman numeral V. We would not have to put inversion numbers because it's in root position, but if we were to, we'd put the numbers 5/3. The next chord is a D major chord, D, F sharp, A. It's in root position because D is in the bass. This is in D major, so we'd put a capital I with no inversion numbers, but if we did put inversion numbers, it would be 5/3. This example has one flat in the key signature indicating either F major or D minor. The first notes we see is C, which is the dominant of F major. The first chord we see is F, A, C, which is an F chord. And as we listen to this example, we'll hear that F sounds like its tonal center. So even though there are some accidentals in this piece for color, this piece is in F major. That first chord we see here is F, A, C. It has F as its bass. It is in root position. Therefore, we would label this with a capital I with no inversion symbols. If we did put inversion symbols, they would be 5/3. The second inversion chord we found in this piece is over here. We have F, A, C. And C is in the bass. F, A, C makes up a 1 chord, so we would label this with a capital I and the inversion symbols 6/4 for second inversion. In our Music Theory 2 course, we'll find out that this particular example has a little bit more going on harmonically, and we would actually analyze it with further symbols, but we'll save that for then.